Imagine there's no heaven. Sorry. It's easy if you try. Stage fright's getting to me. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday it will join us, and the world will live as one. Sorry, my guitar is tweaking out. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us.
Thank you. Give a big hand, please, to Gabriella Simpkins.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Woohoo.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Beautiful, Gabby. Thank you.
Now we're up for our state issues panel, and to get us started on that panel, we have Beth Huang. Beth.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Huang. I go by she, her, hers, and I'm with the Boston Democratic Socialists of America. It's so wonderful to join all of you beautiful progressive activists across our Commonwealth this afternoon. Really, let's give it up one more time for Gabriella from Cape Cod DSA. It's amazing to see a comrade with such a beautiful voice and who's so talented. And so I'm really pleased to join a few of a few amazing colleagues from across the state who are moving mountains to make progressive change in Massachusetts. As many of us know, we have a reputation for being a liberal bastion in Massachusetts, and yet I think Joe Manchin has a more progressive voting rights bill than the state Senate was able to pass earlier this year. So that's a little embarrassing sometimes. And so although the floor isn't quite as low as it is in some states, we know that there's a huge gap between where we are and where the ceiling of possibility is. And so I'm really excited to explore how we maximize those opportunities to build and wield power to reach what our political potential is in Massachusetts. And so I'm so glad to be joined by Anna Callahan from the Incorruptibles, Martha from Our Revolution Massachusetts, Jonathan Cohn from Progressive Mass, and Jordan Berg Powers from Mass Alliance. So let's give it up for our 4 panelists. And I'm going to start with what I want to hear from all of you is, what is your elevator pitch for your organization's mission, and what is the core strategy that you are trying to move in Massachusetts? So I'm going to start with Jonathan to get us started, and then I'll probably call on Anna, Martha, and then Jordan.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for Beth for facilitating, and all of the other people on here host. So I'm the political director for Progressive Massachusetts. Briefly on Progressive Mass, was formerly the Issues Committee Chair and Elections Committee Chair. That founded actually just around a decade ago, and I'll look at with a few kind of pieces in mind. One, as just a general multi-issue organization focused on pushing forward progressive policy in Massachusetts, and especially state-level policy. With the state-level policy focus being in direct kind of recognition of the point that you were making, Beth, about that big gap that exists between the overwhelming Democratic supermajority that we have in the State House here and the realities of what we get passed. I think that we've managed to, over the years, move from the legislature passing things that are actively harmful to being woefully insufficient, but we can still go much further than that. And kind of the organization formed during those back in like the early 2010s, when you could see that we weren't going to have a lot that we could get done in DC, and that the ambitions wouldn't be as high as we would want. But why could we not be doing stuff here in Massachusetts where we have that possibility? And another kind of principle in mind was about organizers who realized that they saw the same people campaign to campaign, and the need to actually have people connected outside of just the start and stop of campaign cycles, and to have kind of structures for people to be engaged throughout the year and throughout cycles, whether it's so that they can focus on state politics, to learn more, advocate more effectively, and not have to kind of rebuild every few years and the difficulties that poses in actually having forward momentum in the state. So that'll be my kind of short overview. That I could go longer, but we have many other great people on the panel who can talk.
Who wouldn't love to be trapped in an elevator with Jonathan Cohn? Let's go to Anna, and then Martha and Jordan.
Thanks. First, how amazing to be on this panel with people that I just adore in Massachusetts and have the greatest respect for. My name is Anna Callahan. I use she, her, and I was a software engineer until early 2016 when I left my job to volunteer full-time for the Bernie campaign. And after that, I spent about 4 years training people in a unique strategy for political organizing that I learned on the West Coast. And that is the strategy that Incorruptible Mass uses. And it's the strategy I'll talk about today. Incorruptible Mass was founded after Marianella Rivera and Damali Vidot all ran for state rep in 2020. And we believed that we had a vision for winning a large progressive slate of state reps to the State House. So the Incorruptible Mass strategy starts with a recognition of a problem. Guess what? Power corrupts, right? This should not come as a surprise to anyone. So we call this the cardinal rule of politics, that every elected official moves only in one direction. That is away from policies that benefit the vast majority of Americans and toward policies that benefit the powerful few. It is a one-way street. They don't come back our way. And this is especially true in the Massachusetts State House. Jordan, Jonathan, and I do a podcast together, and I think they will back me up in saying that every session, we endorse people that we hope are going to be good. And it takes very little time for them to begin voting against transparency, voting to give more power to the speaker, and basically working to ensure that the powerful get more power and our policies can never get passed. So the Incorruptible Mass strategy, everything in it is designed to prevent that from happening. First, we recognize that elected officials, like all human beings, take on the culture of the people that they see as their peer group or their team, right? And a lot of times that's their colleagues at the State House. That's why they take that culture on. So everything in our strategy before, during, and after elections has to provide candidates and elected officials with a trusted team that is materially helpful to them in their job of passing progressive policy. So the basics of our strategy is like we build a coalition of progressive groups that comes together over a common platform, focuses on a single electoral body, and then we cultivate candidates from within that coalition. And after the election, we provide each of our elected officials with deep support to help them pass policy. And that's the part that I feel like is relatively unknown. So again, every tactic in our strategy purposefully creates a support network that our candidates and elected officials see as their genuine team. So our slate of candidates works together over the course of the campaign. So they learn how to make decisions together and to trust each other. But the really unique part is the support provided by the coalition after the election that we at the Incorruptibles call co-governance. So our elected officials have an entire coalition at their fingertips who are decades-long experts in specific policies with access to lawyers, advisors, and all the other supports that they need to do the work of governing. We can also provide mutual aid volunteers for elected officials to help them with constituent services. So we're materially involved after the election in the work of governing that, as the people I learned this model from, they said, no one person can do that. So if you don't provide that support, you have to expect your elected officials to move down that road to the other side. I'll stop there.
Amazing. Love the kind of collective governance, collective leadership, brain trust model. Let's go to Martha. Could you tell us about the strategy and mission of our revolution?
You're muted, Martha. Martha, you're muted.
There we go. My name is Martha Karchere. I'm co-chair of Our Revolution Massachusetts, and I apologize for my dependency on props. This is my first time presenting about Our Revolution Massachusetts, and this I think will help clarify the points that I want to make. If I can get this to, okay. So Our Revolution Massachusetts is basically part of the Our Revolution movement that started with the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign. Bernie said at the beginning of his campaign that he was not just running for office, he was running to build a movement. And Bernie's issues, his platform on the right, I think is familiar to all of us. These are the issues that we are all trying to work together to get turned into legislation. Here is our elevator pitch mission statement. Our Revolution Massachusetts is organizing a political revolution to challenge the power of the top 1% to prioritize the needs of all people and our planet. We work statewide towards a livable, sustainable world with economic, racial, social, and environmental justice where all people can thrive. So here's a kind of geographic representation of Our Revolution Massachusetts. Our basic building blocks are our affiliate organizations, which are groups of 10 or more Our Revolution Massachusetts members. They come together to support progressive issues and elect progressive champions. You can see we are scattered throughout the state, but we're certainly concentrated in the Boston area. We also have caucuses, the working poor, LGBTQ, and youth. And membership for those caucuses is drawn from throughout the entire state, made much easier now in this time of Zoom. We also have working committees, which I can talk about later during other questions. So here's our strategic goals. It's Bernie's triangle, very familiar to our Revolution members. We want to build local progressive powerhouses, our affiliate groups that I just showed you in the state. And we want to do this to be able to elect progressive champions, build a progressive party, and win progressive policies. And I'll stop there.
Awesome. You are doing a great job. If this is your first time being on a panel for Our Revolution. And so speaking of building local progressive powerhouses, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, the director of Mass Alliance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Berg Powers. I use he, him. I'm coming to you from land that was and is continued to be stewarded by the Nipmuc people here in Worcester, Massachusetts. And thanks for having me. So Mass Alliance, I am the executive director of Mass Alliance. Mass Alliance is a coalition of 28 progressive political organizations that can do explicitly electoral work. So that might make you a PAC, a union, or a C4 organization. Mass Peace Action is a member. Progressive Massachusetts is a member. We have many members. Our members work on a plethora of issues, whether that be peace, the environment, LGBTQI equality, reproductive rights, economic justice, social justice, and groups like Progressive Mass that sort of deal with the plethora of progressive issues. And the idea is that if we could come together and work together to build a movement, we will be better off. So we very much situate with some of the other groups here. We have the same sort of diagnosis of problems. Our state house could be better. It does not do what it should be doing. It could be doing more to make our state more livable and more better for people who live here. Our legislature just fails year in and year out to do that. And so Mass Alliance comes together both to help elect people through our PAC, who we hope will go on to be better, although Anna has diagnosed some of our problems with electing good people who then go in and get captured by the building. But we do hope to elect good people in the State House. We hope to by bringing our groups together, we'll be stronger. If you're sort of out on a limb and you're trying to pass things by yourself, it's really difficult. But I'm really proud in Massachusetts. We actually take for granted, for example, the driver's license bill, the bill to make it anybody should be able to get a driver's license regardless of their status. Most states struggle to have sort of a broad coalition. But here in Massachusetts, we have reproductive groups on it. We have environmental justice groups on it who are all around these issues. That's really important. And I think the culture of working together, of bringing people together, that's sort of what Mass Alliance does and tries to do on a regular basis to bring that culture of progressives working as a whole to move forward our progressive agenda. I'll leave it there mostly, but I guess I'll just leave it with this by saying, I think that there is a lot of overlap with the work that we do. And rather than thinking that that is a negative or like we have to think, I think of that as a positive. Like, what a wonderful thing that I hang out with Anna and I hang out with Jonathan on a regular basis. And we've supported ORMA. And even though a lot of times our stuff goes together, it is critical that we're working together and sometimes overlapping because we can't be everywhere. We don't have all the expertise. We don't have all the wisdom. We don't have all the ways to touch people. And it's so wonderful that there are people who are doing this work and we're talking to each other. We respect each other. We're working together. That's how we're going to win. And so with that, I'll leave it to you, Beth.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass it right back to you, Jordan, in a moment. So yes, the State House has been failing to do the bare minimum in many cases, and especially the State House has been failing to do the bare minimum for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, working class communities, and anyone who's been pushed to the margins by racism, capitalism, sexism, ableism, and a number of other forms of oppression. How do we build even more support for a progressive agenda among a multiracial population in Massachusetts? And how do we raise awareness about the importance of state politics to people who are often invisible to Beacon Hill? So I'll pass it to Jordan first, and then whoever wants to hop in next, maybe just raise your hand and I'll call on you next.
Yeah, I guess I would say the two biggest things we should be doing is, one, we should be leading with policy. We should be talking about the things that we want to do to make people's lives better. But we need to do that in a way that gets out of this thing that we do as progressives, which is we jump to the conclusion. We sort of tell people what it is that we want to do, and we haven't brought people on the journey that we've actually done in our minds of why is this important? Why is it relevant to your lives? Why this policy? Why are we trying to push these things? And so we really need to sell the benefits. This is something I talk a lot about. We need to tell people what it is that we're hoping to do for people, and we need to ground our work in the policies that will enact those things, make it better. And that is the way to bring people in. We can't sort of just tell people it's important or tell people to come on. We have to really ground the work in what it is that will make people's lives better. And I'll just give a really quick example. One of the things that drives me crazy is we say, we need to have more money for schools. Okay, but why? Like, what do we need more money for schools for? What does that mean? It's so amorphous. It doesn't really mean anything. It's not tangible for people. So one of the things I like to say is every kid should have an opportunity to have their dream, to live their dreams, to be able to fulfill their dreams. Schools should be places where kids learn the skills they need to fulfill their dreams. And they're not. In fact, for a lot of kids, they're places of nightmares. They're places of over-testing, of incarceration, and of knowing that they're hopeless for the future. They should be places where we're fulfilling people's dreams. That's people understand that, they get that, and they want that for their kids. So that's a way that we could take a policy that we talk about poorly and make it relevant to people's lives. If we led that way with communities of color, if we start to talk about that in ways, if we start to think about schools, not just as places where we try to educate some, but think of schools where we design them for everybody, for people with disabilities, for people who are at the margins, for people who are struggling to eat, struggling to find homes. If we think about schools as places to bring everyone in, that universal design, then we could serve all these people, and people will get that. They'll be in on the ground floor, and then we could talk about why policy, why the politics, why these things. So lead with policy, but do so in a way that people can hear us and understand these policies.
Yep, let's go to Anna next, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
100% on delivering on our promises, right? So passing policy. I also think everyone here will agree that like the candidates that we cultivate and endorse need to reflect the diversity of these communities, and so they see themselves in the candidates. For our model, there are two specific ways that we involve those groups of people. Just generally in co-governance, seeking them out, ensuring that they are among the people that we are bringing in weekly as advisors to the candidates. But also we have a specific tactic, which is, we stole it straight from the Bernie campaign. So it's these listening sessions where you go to a specific community, right? So you might go to a Haitian church, you might go to a high school, you might go to, whatever it is, it's a group of people like a PTO, a group of people that has lived experience in common, and it's 70% listening. So you're asking them for personal stories of how policy affects their lives. But then at the end, there's a part where the candidate or the elected official, this would be for elected officials, right? They should be doing this multiple times per week, the entire time they're an elected official. That they should be having these sessions where they're listening to the most impacted communities and then telling those people how they can get involved, how they can get involved in the co-governance, how they can get involved with one of the coalition partners, so that we ask more from them than just voting, but we actually involve them in the governance part.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I can take in one thing. kind of piggybacking off stuff that Anna and Jordan were talking about, reminded me of the importance of in any type of civic education and political education that we do, kind of helping to explain what levels of government that we can kind of put pressure on to affect different types of change. So when we're talking about, so when Jordan's talking about how to actually ground the discussion in kind of more and more equitable school funding, what part of that fight is the local fight, what part of that is the state fight, and what part of that is the federal fight, and being able to see those different fights as connected and helping people to understand what powers exist at different levels of government and what power they have to influence the people at those levels of government as well. Since one thing I think that we often take for granted is that people that people understand things as political issues. It's something that I think, piggybacking on Jordan's point about kind of not starting from the end point when you're discussing things, is that viewing a reality as something that is in fact a result of policy, and a result of policy that can be changed, and that can be changed by specific actors, and those actors being people that you can name and determine whom they are and possibly influence. None of that is kind of almost, let's say, something that people are born knowing, or even by like most education come to knowing. So it actually requires kind of work and ongoing work to make that become a reality for people.
Go right ahead, Martha. What's on your mind?
One of the ways that ORMA is reaching out to marginalized groups is very similar to what's been stressed here by other speakers, which is that we need to win on progressive policies. And clearly, policies such as Green New Deal, Medicare for All, campaign reform benefit marginalized communities, working class communities enormously. We select priorities in terms of issues in the representative council. The representative council is made up of representatives from the different affiliates and from the different caucuses. Work on policy takes place in working committees, caucuses, and affiliates. The working groups and caucuses are made up of affiliated and unaffiliated members. But we're quick to admit we're not expert in this area. Our membership is certainly overrepresented by white, fairly upper middle class, educated people. And it is our philosophy that while we're not the expert in every area of concern, our goal is to collaborate with other issue-focused groups, other groups that have expertise in these more marginalized communities, in the labor movement, and join forces to bring about change. And the other, we're very aware that we need to reach out. And so we're also doing a strategic planning process and really looking at whether we need to hire community organizers that come from the communities that we want to reach out to and organize in. And I'm done.
Yep, absolutely. Well, none of us can do it alone. And I think a common set of threads are we need trusted leaders in all communities, especially working class BIPOC communities. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask, so what do you think is the relationship between progressives and centrists in Massachusetts politics? How do progressives battle centrists for political power? I think that's a big part of what separates the floor and the ceiling of possibility. And then I'd be very curious what folks here think. How does the progressive movement work against corporate control of the Democratic Party, or is it better to work outside of the Democratic Party? So I'm going to start with you, Martha. We're going to do this continued snake draft, like the like the NBA pick. So Martha, tell us about ORMA and its perspective on the relationship between progressives and the Democratic Party.
Definitely. I may have to struggle a little bit to get my, you know what? It's not gonna be easy for me to get the slide that I want up. Could someone else go first and I'll just work on getting that to happen?
Totally. Is there someone who wants to jump in? I know you all have thoughts about this.
Go ahead,
Use
Anna.
your power, Beth.
Go ahead, Anna.
Let's go to you, Anna, first.
Okay. So as far as the party itself, you know, I really think that we like the concept that I gravitate towards the most is building a party without the party, right? So you do what a party should be doing. You have a binding platform. If people don't stick to the platform, they're out. You provide real support to them after they're elected. But you don't want the ball and chain of a legal party designation because that is basically signing up to lose. So I think that we can build that, but we don't have to be working outside of the Democratic Party necessarily. So the way I view this relationship between progressives, centrists, and even the Republicans in our state is a little bit different because I've seen groups that do the strategy I talk about. And like right now in Medford, we're doing that strategy. And so right now, I think we are like, we're a little bit like abused spouses in that we elect these people and then they betray us in ways that matter. And then we keep like supporting, we keep asking them, you know, we keep sort of lobbying them and protecting them from having people run against them. And what I see when groups that really do this well is there is a whole different group of elected officials that gets created. People who are genuinely on our side. 100%, they are leaders in the movements for change. They are the ones leading us. And that's what's happening in Medford with their elected officials, right? And so it becomes really different. Like through doing this strategy, you get a different set of elected officials who are like the actual, I mean, I don't want to do this like purist thing. It's when you see it, you understand completely what the difference is. You're like, oh, wow. Like, I didn't know we could have that. And as far as the battle for power of the control of the Democratic Party, when there is an organization like that, that's like a big coalition and that has candidates who really treat them as a team and are deeply embedded into that group, then it creates a second locus of power, right? So there's the speaker, who only the speaker can really offer state reps the things that they want or to take them away. And currently most challenges to incumbents fail. And even if they succeed, the challenger poses no threat to any other incumbent, right? So there's no actual threat, credible, statewide, carrot or stick. But with a long-lasting organization that runs slates of candidates, every win becomes a credible threat to the other members of the state house, which creates a second locus of power, like a second entity that can demand policy adherence. So that's from the strategy that I talk about, like that is the way that we sort of break this stranglehold and the different way of viewing sort of progressives, centrists, and our small Republican Party.
Yep, developing that second locus of power is essential. Martha, do you want to hop in at this point?
Yes, thanks. So people have probably already recognized that these strategies that I'm explaining are part of Bernie's triangle. So this is a second strategy, which is to build a progressive party, which I'll come back to. You know, essentially our state is controlled by Democrats, and in general, even amongst my friends here in Jamaica Plain, there's complacency that because the Democratic Party is predominant in Massachusetts, we are a progressive state. And, maybe this is true compared with Florida or Texas, but on closer look, obviously progressive Democrats are vastly outnumbered by conservative Democrats. And, this may not be true in many of our larger cities, which are predominantly people of color. They align less with the Democrats, but nonetheless, power in the state house is tilted to the suburbs, who will elect centrists or corporate Democrats, which explains why we continue to wait for popular issues to become legislation, like the Bernie platform, Medicare for all, same-day voter registration, free universal child care, and so on. And so, it is, I think the other, Anna and others, I'm sure will talk about how the State House seems like a black box to so many people. There's so much lost by not having progressive representation, but explaining that to friends and neighbors is not easy. And yet, we have a very wealthy state. We have a large state in terms of population, as large as small countries. There's absolutely no reason that we could not both pass and pay for progressive legislation like Medicare for all. So, given this situation, ORMA is trying to thread a needle. Basically, we want to build a progressive party, but it's how we do that is a tactical choice. And so some members and affiliates work inside the Democratic Party. We do have a political action and civic engagement committee to channel Dem transform work. Affiliates often jump on electoral campaigns. And we were recently very active in the Democratic Convention to get an even more progressive platform, hoping, again, to use this as a standard to compare the records of our electeds to. We are working to increase the power and numbers of the Progressive Caucus. And again, we also work outside of the party. A lot of the affiliates, they're independent, they're not aligned with a Democratic or a Republican party. However, I would say given the lack of ranked choice voting, while there's some energy to think about a third party, there's a general recognition that that's counterproductive and puts us at risk of spoiling an election and throwing the election to a more conservative candidate. Lastly, so much of this really is based on messaging. And so we have a communications committee, which is critical in getting our message out. And, and again, that messaging about, policy being the love language for the entire state. And we need to take back the narrative of corporate media, which portrays crises in terms of individual problems and avoids any kind of true social analysis. And I'm done.
Absolutely. So I like what you said, Martha, about how it's a tactical question. Jonathan, I was hoping that you could cover some of the tactical questions, especially regarding the ballot line.
Yeah, so kind of when talking about kind of interfacing with a party, always kind of raises the question of like what fundamentally is a party, and like at its basis, part of it is just the ballot line. There's like a pre-designated ballot line for any party. So when you exist in a pretty much a two-party system that we have had for like a striking number of years, to elect people who want to push progressive policies, there is one ballot line that you can get somebody better or worse on that ballot line. So that's one kind of factor, but as well as you can run progressives on that who have a built-in base of people who will vote for the person on that ballot line. There's also an array of infrastructure. So, and I'm always amazed by how different ward and town committees are in different parts of the state. Some are very active, some are very dormant, some don't even exist. Some are actively hostile to progressive change, some are very welcoming to it. And so it kind of leads to a whole array of different responses that you could have, right? in some cases, people try to take over a ward, kind of a ward or town committee. And we had 2 examples of that in Boston last year, where people actually had fights on the ballot to take over ward committees that had been like traditionally machine dominated sources of local power. But it's also, but even if you have that, it doesn't negate the need for kind of an independent infrastructure, an ecosystem of kind of progressive organizations, because you always, especially when it comes to the state level, because a state Democratic Party will never be able to do the work of pushing the members of that state Democratic Party in the legislature that outside organizations will do. Because that party's goal, first and foremost, is to get those people elected. And if your goal, first and foremost, is to elect people with D's next to your name, you're by nature not going to do the work of really like pushing them or targeting them or kind of calling them out when they need to be called out. You can have that on a local level when kind of given the independence that and how certain ward and town committees can operate. But on the state level, that's just not, like, it's difficult to get that actual base of accountability. And the only times they've ever seen something like that is when it's not really kind of an independent source, but where a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature are warring with each other, and it becomes the Democratic governor's tool against the Democratic legislature, i.e. New Jersey. But that still doesn't even do the work of kind of an independent progressive ecosystem, which is important to have.
Let's go to Jordan to talk more about that.
Yeah, so my preference is always, I actually like the way the Democratic Party functions in Massachusetts in that it's incredibly weak and pretty much inefficient. I like that because I think it creates an opportunity for progressives to hold and push real power. I worry all the time about a Democratic Party that has power. I talk to my colleagues in Illinois where the Democratic Party just straight up takes away, like we think we protect incumbents. We don't protect incumbents in Massachusetts. Incumbents in Massachusetts are pretty weak compared to most states. I came from Pennsylvania where we gave around walking around money to candidates, which means that my parents used to get paid for their votes straight up in Philadelphia. Or in Illinois, where they completely take away all power from people challenging incumbents. Like basically in Massachusetts, they're pretty much left on their own for us to take them off one by one. So I'm always amazed by how unorganized our opposition is, and I hope that they continue to be so. So I just think we have a lot of opportunity for change, and we don't maximize it in Massachusetts. And we don't maximize the fact that our opponents are inefficient, don't know what they're doing, and are completely, they basically don't really have a lot of infrastructure. You know, most of the infrastructure is ours, so it's ours for the taking. I will say I don't, you know, for me, modernism is sort of a beliefless. It doesn't really mean anything. It's amorphous mush of nothing, which is also to our benefit because people hold conflicting views. They hold conflicting ideas, right? White supremacists will vote for people of color. People who hold belief systems that people of color are less than white people will still vote for people of color. People hold a multitude of beliefs and they conflict and they don't make ideological sense. They don't fit neatly into boxes. They don't fit neatly into things, right? And then you add to that the media's fetishization of bipartisanship and a faux middle, right? Like it's fetishizes it. But that means that we can replace their idea of what moderate is with our things. A lot of the times leftists we sort of put ourselves into corners rather than understanding that our positions are the overwhelming majority, right? Like, so one of the things I see is I love Massachusetts politics because our ideas are overwhelmingly popular and could pass were we to give people an opportunity to vote on them. You know, the leafy suburbs, the conservative other places, right? They agree with us by and large on our issues. It's our legislature that's failing to live up to those things. And so we need to do a better job of meeting people where they're at, bringing them into and bringing them in, not sort of saying you're not perfect, you don't agree with us, you don't perfectly use our language, you don't sort of know our encoded language or know the things that we talk to each other about. We need to bring people in more, open them up, imperfect as people are, conflicting views as people have, bring them into our ideas and encourage them to vote for candidates who represent us and not be worried there are times where it's really important to signal progressive ideas or that we're on a certain team. But there's often times, we run progressive candidates in super conservative or sort of moderate places, and we just talk about issues, and people are like, "Oh, that sounds good." They don't, they're not thinking about their team progressive, right? So that's the way I think about that dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our ideas usually are supported by 2 out of 3 voters or 7 in 10 voters. It doesn't matter if it's same-day voter registration, taxing rich people. It's almost always 65 to 73%. And often they're supported by usually high 40% of legislators. We rarely crack 50%. It's always like 45% of legislators co-sponsor something. And I often think of the state house as like the problem of, do we have support from the 160 members of the House, or are we trying to go to war with two or three top level leaders in the state house? And so I'm curious how we can overcome this kind of dictatorial control by a very small number of people on Beacon Hill, who mostly serve to represent the interests of the wealthy and corporations. And so I'd love to start with Anna about how we break this kind of dictatorship of the 2 or the 3 on Beacon Hill.
Ooh, that is the question of the day, right? I love thinking about this stuff. So what we have is, and I want people to understand what vote whipping does. So it's the job of leadership, wherever they are, Congress and your state and blah, 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 state house, wherever there's like a party leader, it is their job to whip votes. And what that means is, just go to the Indivisible's page on the definition of vote whipping. It'll give you a good idea of it. So it's going in backroom deals with individual legislators to ensure that you get a certain number of votes. And what we have to understand is that what leadership in Massachusetts does is they ensure through backroom deals that we will never hear about, that our policies will never pass. That is what they do. And we'll never know about those. We'll never know about those meetings. Because the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, right? The first rule of vote whipping is you never talk about vote whipping and you don't tell anybody that it's happening. So how do we do that? And people talk about, we have to get to 81. Like, we don't have to get to 81. And there's a really interesting, this is something from this group I learned this from on the West Coast called the RPA. The way that they did it was really fascinating. And I'm just going to give you a taste. So first of all, what I mentioned before, which is having a second locus of power that is ongoing, and that the state reps who, for example, are voting against transparency, voting to get more power to the speaker, like voting to uphold this system, people who vote against that, they have to feel like have got a target on their backs. So they cannot be protected. So that's one thing, having a second locus of power. But this really cool tactic within the strategy, which is to coalesce a coalition of groups around a single policy for the election cycle. So you all decide, yes, we're willing to go to town on this one issue for one election cycle. And when you do that, what happens is the voters and the state reps all come to believe that whoever won or lost in this election, it was because of that issue. So state reps see that they're like, let's say you only win like 10 seats. The other 150 state reps think to themselves, wow, my colleagues lost their jobs because of X issue. I can't afford to be against that issue anymore. It's a way to move a single issue forward when you have way less than a majority. So that's just one of the tactics that comes out of this strategy that can help us sort of, break that stranglehold before we've gotten to like an 81 number, how to really begin to bust up that system before we get to 81.
Great. Let's go to Jonathan, and then we'll go to Jordan.
Thanks. I'm just piggybacking that and like a few different things kind of going through my mind on this. One, I often describe the issue in the state house is a problem of state legislators having two bosses, that in most jobs that people experience if you're employed, the person who chooses who controls your pay is also the person who determines whether to hire or fire you. In the state house, that's not true, right? Because considering that if you dole out committee assignments in a building, you're controlling somebody's pay if that committee comes with additional money. But as voters, we're the ones who can ultimately choose whether to hire or fire legislators. And that creates a kind of problematic dynamic where there are two different sets of allegiances and two different things for them to keep in mind. And many of them gravitate more toward the person who controls pay than the many people who control whether to hire or fire them, for a simple reason of intensity. That's a much tighter and a much more kind of intensely felt kind of relationship than the one from the many people who choose whether to hire or fire them. You also have thinking of that kind of internal ecosystem in the legislature. I like to describe it as you have kind of some people who are good, some people who would be better if they had better incentives, some people who create bad incentives for others, and people who are there to just cut ribbons. And when you kind of view it like that, one of the questions that you need to keep in mind is, how do you create better incentives for that group of people who might say that they agree with you on most things, but they don't really do much to advance them? And as well as also how you can work to try to even show what the spreads up within the building are. Because if you want to elect somebody better to a seat, you need some actual evidence to show that there's something at stake. And I know that one thing that some of us had worked with legislators last session on was getting more recorded votes in the legislature. Because, and I'll give a shout out to the scorecard that we have with Progressive Mass at scorecard.progressivemass.com, because the only way that you'll know whether your state legislators are supporting the things that they tell you and that you want them to is if you actually can look at kind of those receipts of their votes. And it's something that's important to come both for putting pressure on them or working with them to build power, as well as the kind of accountability of elections. And you don't have that strong of an organized progressive infrastructure within the legislature. There are progressive caucuses. Like the progressive caucus in the Senate, I've always questioned how much of a caucus it is. No offense, they're great people, but the progressive caucus in the House is mainly like an info sharing body for people to talk about their priorities rather than to strategize and to kind of whip votes, which if you look at the national level, there's been an increasing movement under Pramila Jayapal to view the progressive caucus as a source of whipping votes and showing the power that they have as a bloc to influence an outcome. And we don't really have that in the legislature, of that kind of real organized effort of people willing to vote in a bloc to kind of change the possibility of outcomes. And to get that, you do need a certain effort kind of across cycles to refuel the legislature, because of how high the burnout rate is often going to be with legislators if you're in an unfriendly ecosystem. Because if you're trying to kind of almost like swim upstream in a body where all of the incentives are not made in a conducive way, it is very easy for people to burn out and then just kind of go along to get along because it makes their life easier. And some of that is even the influence that you as an activist need to have in whether that does leave their life easier going that route. But it's something that often have to keep in mind as well, of that kind of ongoing work.
For sure. Let's go to Jordan and then Martha.
So I agree with all these things. I'm not gonna like repeat it. I guess I'll say the two things that I wish we would do is, one, stop protecting people who do the bad things. Like we tend to do this thing where, because we like them, we don't call them out, but actually we need to say when people do the wrong thing, even when we like them. So the first thing is to call them out, and the second thing is to actually call them out. So one of the things that happens is we might do it on Facebook, we might, I don't know, but we need to write letters to the editor because they read those and they get freaked out. And so like, you know, we need to go to mass media and corporate media, as terrible as it is. And we could spend a whole hour with me critiquing how much many of the problems we have in our state house is because our corporate media system is a total mess and fails us regularly and is part of the problem we have. But we need to go to those spaces and say clearly, you know, they're not doing the right thing, and that will help them start to do the right thing. You know, we talk to ourselves about it, but you know, we need to tell other people, your legislator stinks. Most people don't know. They have no idea.
For sure.
Or even people we like did the wrong thing. They need to know. People need to know that that's happening.
For sure. Let's go to you, Martha.
So, you know, I'm hugely impressed by the eloquence and accuracy of Jonathan, Anna, and Jordan. I don't think I'm going to say anything that in any way disputes anything that they've said. I'm going to describe actually the third strategic goal for our Revolution Massachusetts, which I think just reinforces what we've heard. That, you know, essentially when we elect people to represent us, we want them to be part of a movement. We want them building a movement. Someone who only wants office for the power that it brings is not going to bring about the change that that their community needs. ORMA is very impressed by Incorruptible Mass's model. When possible, we totally endorse the idea of local slates of candidates for the different reasons that others have mentioned. You know, it breaks down isolation and it also builds power in the legislature itself. And, you know, it also, you know, when you have a group that has this loyalty and membership to a movement, you've got the back and forth of accountability. Progressive champions organize as well as mobilize. Organizing is convincing people to join an organization, formulate policy, carry out agreed upon actions, not just to show up for one issue. And I would put out there that our Revolution Massachusetts is actively recruiting members. It's not hard to become a member of our Revolution Massachusetts. You engage in any of our activities, you pay dues. We have lots of places to put you to work, from building affiliates to joining a issue-related working committee to joining one of the caucuses. So with that, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, so last question, we're gonna have to do a little bit of a lightning round on this. In what ways could progressive groups work together in 2022? Let's start with you, Jordan.
Well, Mass Alliance is gonna be bringing folks together to coordinate some of these works. We do it at our table. But, you know, I think it's really important, even if you aren't a C4, Beth actually runs a C3 table where people come together and talk to each other about their plans. We're going to talk to each other with their plans. I'd say reach out, join an organization that's doing some good work. Anna and I talk all the time, at least once a week. There are other groups that are doing great work across the state. So just join one of them and have them talk to each other so that we're coordinating together.
Absolutely. Who's next about how we can work together in 2022?
One thing I can chime in for that, like, it's always good for groups to be in active communication, especially about what are the issues that we want to be elevating in these elections. Looking to next year where there will be some state legislative races open. We have an open gubernatorial race, an open lieutenant gubernatorial race, an open auditor's race, other possibilities of kind of contested races at all levels. And it's good for groups to kind of come together and think about what can we push at this moment and use that opportunity to make it what candidates are talking about, and then you can then follow up and to make sure that they actually I'll kind of follow through with that. I ended up thinking about in terms of coalitions of like since we might have a new open DA race coming soon in Suffolk County, of how in 2018, where we have a number of groups that came together to discuss it, so that you would have organizations on the same page for whom that they were going to endorse to avoid any kind of splitting effect of one group going one way, another group going another way, and all of us letting like the worst candidate win. And so those conversations are always important for groups to have, so that we can kind of work together best and maximize kind of optimize the outcomes.
Let's go to Anna, and then Martha, you'll get the last word.
Great. So at Incorruptible Mass, we have a round table, which is for organizations. And honestly, so we have a smaller group that's sort of the decision-making body that does the endorsements, that sort of does the endorsement recommendations and things. But we have a roundtable that really is open to any progressive organization, and it would be great to have groups join. It'd be absolutely lovely. We're going to be talking about what issue, if we can coalesce around one single issue for this electoral cycle. And also, because our model is so based around volunteer support for these elected officials, we'd love to have everybody here jump in. I'm going to post a link, which is actually, I'm writing a book on this strategy. And I have a first chapter that's available for people to download. It would actually be super helpful just for me to be able to find a publisher. If you can download the first chapter and encourage other friends to download it, I put that in the chat. But yeah, obviously, like working together on many things, policies, working together on not endorsing against each other, but even working together on sort of a strategy that we can use to break the stranglehold and all of that stuff it's very fun and exciting. One of my favorite parts of all this work.
Awesome. And let's go to Martha. How can we work together in 2022?
Well, clearly coalitions, is the way forward. I was very impressed when Alan Minsky talked about getting together with other national organizations to talk about candidates who are running nationally, and making sure that there weren't problems with races where multiple candidates split votes, trying to really exercise power so that the most progressive candidates won. I'd love to see something like that in Massachusetts. What I'm hearing is that there's a number of venues where people are calling for coalitions. I know Mass Peace Action has a table of activist groups that meet fairly regularly. Incorruptible Mass is amazing, and its roundtable, I think, is very important. Our Revolution Massachusetts is definitely reaching out to form coalitions with different groups. I think there's still conversations to be held about how we can unify that even a bit more. We can't go to everybody's coalition table. We need something that convenes all of us so that we can move forward with more power. And so I'm eager to continue that conversation.
And I wish we could continue this conversation for a bit longer, but this is the time that we've got. I think let's take a quick 5-minute bio break. But first, big thank you to Martha, Anna, Jonathan, and Jordan. Let's come back maybe at 2:03 or 2:04, and I'm sure that this is an important conversation that we will continue in 2022 and beyond to build to reach that ceiling of opportunity in Massachusetts. So thank you so much. We'll be back in about 5 minutes.
of the King family. Yeah. Liberation Road. King family? Yep.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this second panel on how we move progressive strategy forward in Massachusetts. I think we all heard a lot of important insights from Anna, Martha, Jordan, and Jonathan in the last panel. And I'm so glad to be joined by some amazing organizers and colleagues especially in organizing BIPOC communities across Massachusetts. We've got Vaughn Goodwin from 1199 SCIU. We have Elvis Mendez from Neighbor to Neighbor Massachusetts, and Mahtowin from United Indians. Anyway, I will have all of them introduce themselves. And so let's start with what is your organization's mission? Who are your people and who's your base? And then how do we build power to make the Massachusetts state government implement a progressive agenda? So let's start with Mahtowin. If you want to introduce yourself, and I would love to hear more about the agenda that you all are advocating for.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. Ampetawashte, Matoia and Machiapi. My name is Mahtowin. I'm co-leader of United American Indians of New England, and I also lead the Indigenous Peoples Day Massachusetts statewide efforts in order to get Indigenous Peoples Day resolutions passed in cities and towns across the state as well as statewide. United American Indians of New England has been around for more than 50 years now. We're best known probably for National Day of Mourning, which is the Indigenous rebuttal to the Thanksgiving myth. And we're in Plymouth every year on so-called Thanksgiving Thursday to have a speak out and march and to mourn for our ancestors who died as a result of the European invasion. Our organization is also very involved with Indigenous Peoples Day campaigns, as I mentioned, and many other things around the state. We're largely interested in helping to ensure that there is Indigenous political leadership here in the state and that Indigenous voices are centered and included in all progressive struggles. It's important to us not only to work on Indigenous issues, but to ensure that we are there in solidarity, in alliance with other people as well, especially other people of color. That's very important to us. But we also come out for, education funding and refugee rights and many, prison abolition, many other things. That's what's important to us. Our members, our leadership is Indigenous, but we have non-Native ally members as well. And we just got through a fantastic National Day of Mourning last week where we had probably nearly 1,500 people, I think, and it was very powerful. If you weren't there, you can watch the live stream on YouTube because it's actually pretty interesting to hear the different speakers and different perspectives and talking about different issues. I want to say briefly that I'm going to be talking about the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. I want to say that I'm not when I say what I'm about to say, that I'm not representing the perspective of all the member groups within the agenda. I am, however, going to give you a United American Indians of New England perspective, which is engaging in settler electoral politics is not what we do first. And I would say also that being engaged in the legislative process is not what we do first. We do it out of necessity. We don't think that passing legislation is going to dismantle all of these systems that oppress and harm us. We don't think that engaging in legislative efforts is going to change settler colonialism. There's a lot of things that are not going to happen through elections or legislation. On the other hand, we are involved with these legislative efforts because it is important sometimes to have legislation passed, even if to put a Band-Aid on the pain that is being caused to our communities and other communities in the state. Sometimes it's not even a Band-Aid. Sometimes it's a tourniquet to try to stop the severe bleeding that's happening from the oppression that we face. So I just want to explain that that's our perspective in talking about this. We don't think that passing legislation is going to dismantle the systems that need to be dismantled. And we don't think that these systems can be reformed either. So the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda, which UAINE is one of the organizations that leads it, is a set of 5 bills that were presented by an Indigenous-led coalition of organizations working on legislation regarding issues that impact Indigenous people specifically in the Commonwealth. And there's about 90,000 or so Indigenous people here in the Commonwealth, as well as Indigenous people who are not from North America, who are Maya or, Andean ancestry or what have you, who are often misclassified as so-called Hispanics. United American Indians of New England and North American Indian Center of Boston formed the coalition along with others back in 2019 because we wanted to be pulling with the same oars rather than be scattered in separate directions working on individual bills. We had 5 bills during that session, one of which was enacted, and that was the bill to form a committee to redesign the state flag and seal because of its offensive image of an Indigenous person. That bill actually took a total of 36 years to get passed. Byron Rushing had originally introduced it. I am of the opinion that we shouldn't have to wait another 36 years to get an Indigenous-centered bill passed again. And I hope that you'll agree with us on that. The first bill that I want to talk about today briefly is an act establishing an Indigenous Peoples Day. And the idea behind this is so that instead of trying to fight the intense racism that we deal with in some of the towns and cities here in Massachusetts, when we go in with local people, with Indigenous Peoples Day resolutions, is for there to be a statewide Indigenous Peoples Bill passed so that Columbus Day will be abolished statewide and everybody will have the same calendar, which would be Indigenous Peoples Day. So this is is very important to undo some of the erasure of Indigenous people, and especially to fight back against the false history and mythology around Columbus and the way that he's held up as a hero to generation after generation of school children in particular. The second bill is promoting education on Native American culture and history, and that is an act relative to celebrating and teaching Native American culture and history. You know, here in Massachusetts public schools, there's like no Indigenous curriculum. So school children here rarely learn about the Native history of the region, nor about contemporary Indigenous peoples who live here. So the goal is to develop a curriculum by working with tribal nations in state and ensure that all children in the schools attain cultural competency in understanding Native history, cultures, and current issues. The third bill is prohibiting Native mascots in Massachusetts. This is the third session where that bill has appeared, and it is simply to prohibit the use of Native American mascots by public schools in the Commonwealth. There's currently maybe about 38 or 40 public high schools in the state that still use Native mascots, and we know that they stereotype Indigenous people, they do psychological harm to our children. That has been very well documented by studies. And we know that it can lead to negative health impacts for our youth who have the highest suicide rates in these countries. And they also create an environment, the mascots create an environment where our youth are made to feel worthless because of the stereotyping with the mascots. The fourth bill is improving Indigenous educational outcomes, and that provides for the creation of a permanent commission relative to the education of American Indian and Alaska Native residents of the Commonwealth. Our students' educational outcomes lag behind, and it would be very important to have a focus on improving opportunities and outcomes for our students. So, and also so that tribes located in the state are identified as being stakeholders and participate in this process. The fifth bill is protecting Native American heritage. This bill would ensure that funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony that are held in governmental, municipal, or nonprofit collections, such as libraries, are not sold for profit. This has been an ongoing problem, and we seek to fill several gaps in laws in order to be able to stop that from happening. You can learn more about our 5 bills by going to maindigenousagenda.org. All the information is there, and also what you can do to help. Thank you, Beth, for allowing me to speak a little bit longer than you had asked for in order to just explain about the bills.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing about this comprehensive and Indigenous-led agenda. I think so many of our problems come from our history of settler colonialism, of chattel slavery, and those are the original root causes of so many of our problems. So whether they're political, cultural, or social and economic ways to address some of the deep harms that have happened, I hope that everyone on this call is ready to throw down on those 5 bills. Let's go to Vaughn, who wears many hats, and I originally met through the Boston Democratic Socialists of America. Vaughn, who are your people, and how are they essential to unlocking the political potential in Massachusetts?
So let me say that my people, to start off, are working class people. That's important to understand. And they are largely people of color, working class people, people of color. And the group that I organize with primarily are healthcare workers, and they care for people with disabilities and seniors. They are described as personal care attendants, and they exist throughout the whole Commonwealth. Right now, throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are about 55,000 of them throughout the whole Commonwealth, which makes them a very large bargaining unit. And in the Metro Boston area, there are over 9,000, to be very clear. And the majority of them are people of color. And when I say people of color, I mean non-Europeans. It does not mean, by the way, that there are not a significant number that are not European. We have a lot of people of European descent that are involved. And our goal when we come to them always is to connect with what their primary concern is. And their primary concern always centers around what is their existential reality. And their existential reality for them is what their economic situation is. And for many of them who are people of non-European descent, it centers around race. Let's be honest ourselves. It centers around race. It centers around things such as discrimination. It centers around things such as police brutality. It centers around exploitation. And they describe it in many different forms. And what they seek for themselves in this Commonwealth is justice. We can describe that as racial justice. We can describe that as economic justice. We can describe that as housing justice. But fundamentally, what they want for themselves is justice. And in addressing justice, we have to be able, when we touch base with them, to describe to them that we are there, not just to deal with their situation temporarily, but to deal with their reality in a way that is not just permanent, but substantial. Why? Because we have people that come into their communities all the time, wanting votes, wanting different things, and they are subject to exploitation. They are subject to being manipulated. And as a result, in these communities, the ability to vote, the ability to participate in the electoral process is low because they have found themselves being exploited, being taken advantage of over and over again. So we have to, in a serious way, become allies, become partners, become comrades in their struggle. And in many organizations, we have to show that we are there as allies in their struggle. Just have to be honest about that. We have to be honest about that. And in many of our organizations, we have to show that we are just not preaching about racial justice. We have to show that we represent racial justice within our organizations. Because if we look in organizations and those organizations don't reflect the communities that they are reaching out to, they don't want to have nothing to do with it. Got to be honest about that. You know, we have a lot of organizations, for instance, that talk about fighting racial justice, but there may not be racial justice within those organizations themselves. If we are not about the process of electing people of color into our organizations in order to fight racism and fight for racial justice, how can we be allies in terms of dealing with it? If we ourselves describe ourselves as progressive organizations, describe ourselves as organizations that want to fight economic and racial exploitation, and we are exploiting certain groups within our own organizations, then how can we effectively fight those things that we are practicing within ourselves? So we have to be clear and we have to be upfront and we have to be thorough about this process. And this is not meant to say anything about any particular organizations, but there are many organizations that come into Boston, Massachusetts and try to work with us. And many times they say it's difficult to work with us because of a peculiarity that we have here. And that is, we talk about justice, but we don't represent justice. We talk about fighting racial injustice, but we don't represent it ourselves. So my challenge to this progressive organization that we have here, preach and teach and be what you say you are. If you are going to stand up to fight for justice, then be about the process for fighting for justice. If you are going to say that you're going to fight on behalf of our brothers and sisters who don't look like you, then come and be among us, organize among us, be with us in our struggle, because we need each other. As Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once said, whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly, and that we are all inextricably bound to each other. Who was his letter to the folks when who was he writing about when he was in the Birmingham jail? Who was he writing to? It was to the white liberal. That's who his letter was to. Those who claim to be about fighting for justice. And for the most part, they were not with him. When he stood up to fight against the war in Vietnam, they were distant from him. And we are in a different time, and I understand that this is a different group, but to a large extent, we have to do more today. And so I'm saying to everyone that is here, as we are moving into 2022, let's expand this base that we have. Let's talk to our brothers and sisters who are on the margins and bring them into our fold. Let's talk to those neoliberal elements that are out there and bring them into our fold and elect a new governor into office that represents what we are trying to achieve. Not someone who doesn't agree with single payer. Just to be honest.
We love the honesty and the truth, Vaughn. I'm going to pass it to Elvis. We will hear from you in a moment more.
All right.
So Elvis, could you tell us about who are your people, who is Neighbor to Neighbor, and why are the people who Neighbor to Neighbor organizes the part of the key to unlocking the progressive future for Massachusetts?
It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I would say, just real honor to be part of the conversation with folks who've been doing such amazing work for so long. I agree with the comment about the need for a third reconstruction, and after just hearing you, Vaughn, I mean, that touched me deeply. So I think, I'll speak briefly to the question with those questions with regards to us internally as neighbor to neighbor, and then I think some of the ways in which folks have addressed kind of like the larger movement problems or situation, and how at least my 2 cents on it. So Neighbor to Neighbor Massachusetts, we're a statewide people's organization. Our mission is pretty straightforward. We put people and planet before profit. We're made up of largely working class folks of color in the 4 gateway cities: Lynn, Worcester, Holyoke, and Springfield, and then some of their neighboring surrounding towns like Chicopee, Salem, some of the sort of bordering cities. Our goal, or the way that we see building our path to power, is to really create that new majority. to bring together working class folks, historically marginalized communities in those cities. And we're really cognizant of the fact that it's an aspirational statement, right? It is, majorities have to be built, solidarity, even within groups, which I think Vaughn was speaking to, within organizations, within coalitions, et cetera. That's work, that's labor that has to really be done. And we see building political power, our sort of internal direction is that we're guided, by the decisions that our membership takes. So we make as much space and opportunity as possible for our membership and folks who are around our organization to help us determine the direction of our work. So for example, this past year, we've been having imagination sessions in our chapter cities around housing, which is really just creating a space for folks who are being priced out of their cities, whether that's like the rent being too high, or they're feeling like they can't, the idea of buying a home in their city is just completely impractical at this point because of the way that the market is. But spaces for folks to be able to think through what change could look like, what their aspirations for a better city, a city that fully actually serves their needs looks like. And then from there, really moving towards deepening our political education and analysis. I think for us, it's super important that we don't tokenize our membership, and that we ourselves as an organization not be tokenized in different spaces, right? And that means like taking really seriously the concerns and the contradictions that pop up in our space, both as an organization and then with our coalition partners, and working and being really deliberate about upping our game and our political analysis, and also the technical aspects of the work, so that our folks, if they are going to show up at a city council meeting or a school board, or if they're going to themselves run for office, because we do have a C4 where we help regular folks run for office, that we feel confident in what it is that we're pushing and moving forward. So in short, our focus is really on gateway cities, working class people of color within those cities. We believe that there is substantial work to be done there electorally in terms of the percentage of the population that we make up and how we show up in elections. And then I would say, taking a step back in terms of what we're sort of observing of the kind of movement overall, is that we're, as I'm sure has been discussed throughout the day, in really trying times. I mean, we have a situation with a extreme right wing that's ascendant in the country, and in the state, I think there are some real challenges that we have to confront in order to be at a place where we can make the type of impact that's necessary for our people. So we have, I think, as many have talked about in different ways, a real crisis of leadership, and that's a crisis of leadership that exists within the State House, which I think we can all talk about, but it also exists within a lot of our organizations and coalitions and other community factions. And that's, there's a lot of power without accountability. There's a lot of power without support. There's an absence of political imagination, I think, and of recycling of a lot of ideas, new bottle, old wines, or whatever the saying goes, right? Which I think needs to be addressed. And I think fundamentally there's a bit of a archaic way of building political alignment in our movement, which is oftentimes led by the money and not led by the work. And that has to do with both the nature of the nonprofit industrial complex and also the nature of what it's going to take to elect people into political office. We spend way too much time chasing the dollar, and a lot of times not being intentional and strategic enough about how we're building power to address the core concerns in front of our folks. So I'll leave it at that for now, but that's a sense of what we have to address, I think, as a movement, and I think how we see some things internally.
Yeah, provocative questions from all three of you. We'll start with Vaughn with the next question. So something that I've seen is that there often is lower voter participation among BIPOC voters, and a lot of that has to do with, there is a real cycle of disengagement. When people don't see themselves reflected in City Hall or the State House, then they don't feel that they're represented adequately, and so then they and their elected officials aren't serving their communities, they're investing in them, and then people think kind of pretty rationally, does my vote make a difference? Does showing up do anything? And then people kind of parachute in and make these promises. The promises aren't kept, and then people don't vote, and then they don't see themselves reflected, and the cycle goes on and on. Or at least it's part of my assessment. So how do we build greater support within our communities, within BIPOC, working class, immigrant communities who are often shut out of the system by capitalism, racism, all of the kind of root causes. And then how do we raise awareness about the importance of state politics, especially in BIPOC and working class communities? So let's start with Vaughn, and then Elvis and Mahtowin, just feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to call on you.
I think the main thing first is to come to their communities and talk with them about what are their issues, what are their concerns. Because largely what happens is when politicians come into their community, they're not there to get what their concerns are. They are there to basically tell them what the agenda is. And people in communities don't want to hear agendas. They don't want to hear that. They really want to know, how are you there to help me? And so we have to connect with what their concerns are largely. And then once we understand what their concerns are, the next thing that we really have to do is to show them ways that their concerns can be addressed, and that the solutions to whatever their concerns are can be resolved. Because the way that we attempt to resolve their concerns has to be in such a way that we can win. Because if we can't win, or we say, okay, well, we're going to pass this piece of legislation, well, we're just going to come out and vote. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't solve legislative solutions to a problem of housing, for instance, is not a solution to a person that whose rent is $1,800 a month, and they're trying to struggle between putting food on the table and whether they got to pay rent. That's not a solution for them. So when we come out to their communities, we got to really seriously sit down with them and help them to figure out ways that they can resolve the problem. And so, Dr. King, and as much as he talked about creative protest, we got to think about creative problem solving. And many times it's not about trying to come up with one solution. We got to think creatively, how are we going to do this together? And even if we can't figure out one way that we can engage one person in the solution, we got to pull all the communities in and say to them, if we can't solve this problem by one person, let's collectively pull the whole community together. And together we can solve this problem. What my mother used to say is not about what one person can do about them by themselves. It's about what every one of us can do together. And it's not about what one person can solve by themselves, but what everybody collectively, a little at a time, can solve. And we can look back at history. We can look at the civil rights movement. We can look at different things that people have been able to do on a small scale to win big victories. I look at AOC, our sister, as you well know, as an example of how she's been able to win gains in New York. We need to have that same type of thing here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We need to show on a massive scale that we collectively, as working people, as poor people in Roxbury, in Mattapan, in Dorchester, in different neighborhoods, if we pull our little bit of resources together, we can accomplish a lot, because there's more of us than there are of them. You understand what I'm saying? And together, our power collectively can do something. We give too much to them. So if we describe that, and if we show through measurable ways that we can win, then in some ways we should be able to do that. But we have to show collectively. And and not necessarily convince, but show people through history and through other means ways that we can collectively win. We have to do it that way. We have to look at history because we can't just look at the present. We have to be students of history, students of collective power, talk about all of the different social movements that happen now. Because unfortunately, a lot of our political engagement today, I hate to say it, is ahistorical. It doesn't include that historical component. And, Marcus Garvey said a people without history is like a tree without roots. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be deeply rooted in a historical context. That's so important. And then after that, we have to stress the urgency of how we need to get involved now. We have to collect our struggle today to struggles in the past and stress the urgency of getting involved now. You know what I'm saying? And then after that, take ownership of it. All of us have to be connected. This is not just about you. This is about our family. This is about our community. This is about all of us. You know what I'm saying? And then solidarity, which is a word we rarely hear in the United States. I mean, Latin America, they use the word solidarity all the time, but we have to work collectively in solidarity. You know what I'm saying? And it's not just about the left in the United States. We have to link up with movements all throughout the earth, leftist movements all throughout the earth. That is really important. Because what we consider to be on the left here in the United States is commonplace in other countries. Trying to fight for healthcare here in the United States and single payer is something that in other countries everybody else has. Trying to fight for maternity leave in the United States is something in other countries that all workers have. Sick days, paid time off. Things that we're still trying to fight for in the United States. In other countries, other people have. You understand? Basic rights, things that we need here, other countries have. So let's join up with those other countries so that we can pull our resources together. Because guess what? If we don't pull our resources together and fight, those above us are pulling their resources together and they are conquering us. So we got to pull our resources together as a radical and progressive left to fight the forces that are fighting against us. We have no choice. You understand what I'm saying? We have no choice. We have to pull our resources together and consciously develop a radical left, both locally and internationally. That's the way it has to be. Either that or we won't survive.
Absolutely. Let's go to you, Elvis, about how do we build the consciousness about the importance of, I think Vaughn powerfully pushed back on the idea of just state politics, but it's really local, state, national, and then international, which I know that Neighbor to Neighbor works with so many different types of immigrant communities and gateway cities. Be curious how, Elvis, you think about and how Neighbor to Neighbor approaches raising the consciousness and that political education about what's at stake.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Yeah, certainly agree with everything that was just said. I think it's so important that, first I'll start by saying that we have to really evaluate what's in front of us. And I think Vaughn really touched upon that in that, there is a need for an internal inventory of us and our allies and understanding and really having a better power analysis, which takes into account the local, the state, and particularly, all our fights are becoming more and more international and global. I mean, we're dealing with forces that, corporations, which you can't just run up on the bus anymore, in one town over or in the nice side of town. I mean, we're talking about transnational, corporations with folks who are hidden behind shell companies. So we have to understand that the nature of what we're combating is different and has evolved, and that's going to take both local and national, and in some cases global and international alliances in order to be effective. That also speaks to the fact that we have to be better at evaluating what our roles are. We don't all have to do the same thing, and nor should we. Because different, it's I often walk into this where folks are like, oh, I want to be an organizer. Your you're a computer programmer. You know what we need? We need some programmers on our side. Like that would be really helpful for a lot of the work that we're doing, right? And so, and that's not to say that that person should not in any way it's not to say like for that person to lose their political identity. Far from it, right? But how do you actualize that political vision that you have with the skills that you are given in a way that contributes to the movement, like the movement actually advancing forward? And I think that's what a lot of, just talk about the history, right? That's what Ella Baker used to do so artfully, right? There's a place for the matron in the fur coat, right? That was her saying, right? There is a place for everybody, right? The role of the organizers to figure out what that is and to be skillful about that and to maximize people's potential in those spaces. And so, you know, we need rapid response teams. We need groups that build movement infrastructure. We need groups that are dedicated to building the pipeline for new candidates. We need many, many, many things. And those things need to be happening, you know, some of it sequenced, but largely at the same time. I'll say that the other part of that is we need to try new things, y'all. It is, you know, for us, we're really trying to evaluate is what we're doing working, or are we comfortable with what we're doing, right? How much of this is inertia and how much of this is effective? Because if it's just inertia, I mean, let's keep it 100. Like we could all go get another job and make a lot more money and, you know, like, you know, put our heads in the sand while the world collapses around us and, you know, forget our, like people do crazy things to shield themselves from the reality of the world today, right? So if we are brave enough to face the situation that's in front of us, we need to be brave enough to face actually what it is that we are doing and contributing, and how can we be most impactful. And so, you know, for us right now, I'll be brief, but it looks like a series of different experiments. I mean, one of them is like, we're experimenting with how we're talking about things. What is the invitation that we extend? Beth, you've heard me say this in the last couple of months, like, you know, just talking to folks, and I'm guilty of this. Some of our language is guilty of this. You know, we'll say like, join the struggle. And, you know, we had folks being like, I'm broke already. Like, I am not trying to struggle harder, right? Like, I need to change this reality. And so, like, you know, the message that we extend to people is so fundamentally important. So we're doing that particularly when it comes to some of the climate messaging and how we're talking about how folks are impacted by those issues. And then the other piece is we do a lot of mobilizing. And I say the royal we, the we as a movement, we got to do more organizing. And so we have to like spend the time on the door and talk to that person and understand the cognitive dissonance between, you know, you're a person of color who's breaking their back in this job, and somehow, you know, you think that Trump's all right because you know, you lived in New York for 10 years and he was pretty cool back then, right? Like that's an actual, like, that's a member of ours, right? And how do we then right? I mean, that person's gone thankfully on a bit of a political journey, because there is that, you know, you have to really struggle and dialogue with that person and expose that cognitive dissonance. And then the last thing I'll say is, going back to something that Vaughn said that I think was really crucially important, is I think we have to show that we can win, and we need to scale up, right? I mean, there are material challenges that folks are in front of them. Folks aren't going to get by on ideas. We need to materially address what's in front of folks and give people the opportunity to see how these things actually play out. And the experiments that are successful, they need to scale up. And for us, that means a big investment on the municipal level, because we know we can win there. We know we can get regular people elected to city council in a lot of these cities. We know we can get regular people elected at the school board in a lot of these cities. From there, we give people that taste of power. And I think that's where it starts.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, when I think of the kind of credible pathway to victory, it sometimes doesn't happen immediately. So, you know, I think of Mahtowin, what you shared about it took 36 years to get this, to get the study done, or about the state flag and seal. I'd be curious to hear from you about how we can break this kind of cycle of disengagement, provide this credible vision, vision that is credible to our people about how we win.
Well, I don't know if we're going to be able to change what's happening at the state legislature, because it's a nightmare there, to be frank. And because of the way bills get bottlenecked there, and because of the way that so many bills just fall by the wayside and don't even get out of committee, I can tell you that we've got some of the bills we had there now, the committees have received literally thousands of emails or letters from people in support of the bills, and they're still sitting in the committee. So, so I think that part is really frustrating. So I think it'd be important that the more people who come out and let their legislators know that these bills are important to them. I can't even believe that, for instance, Safe Communities has had such a long struggle. Like, that should have been passed a long time ago. We see this with so much important legislation. And I honestly believe it's intended to make people frustrated and make people give up on trying to get things passed, because it is so difficult in the state. It's a really big issue. So I think building those alliances are key. I can tell you that, Indigenous people all by ourselves can't get our legislation passed here. We have to have help from, we need support from unions and lots of other organizations in order to make things happen. Even with that, part of the problem, I would say, is because of racism and the erasure of many of us. I know that sometimes when we've gone to the legislature, people are looking at us like they have never seen Native people before. And that's a big problem too, because of the lack of education in the state, because of a lack of non-Native consciousness of our actual existence, it makes it harder too. And a lot of the legislators, unfortunately, are thinking about who they're going to get votes from and who they're not going to get votes from, rather than trying to do what's right. So again, I think coming up with these alliances are going to be key, because Massachusetts is just way behind on a lot of stuff. Frankly, I see things that have been passed in Maine and Vermont and other states, and Massachusetts is just like not stepping up to deal with so many different issues. And so I think putting pressure on, but I think whatever people can do to elect more progressive legislators, and I think legislators who are actually progressive, not progressive in name only. It doesn't mean anything if you're going to say that you're progressive and then you're going to align yourself with Zionism, frankly. For instance, if you're a national level politician, it doesn't mean anything to say that you're progressive, but then you're not actually going to speak in support of unions. Or support union representation, that kind of thing. Like this, it's important that the people actually have a broad, full perspective on what's progressive and what will work. It's almost impossible for working class people to run for office here. It takes a lot of money, even for a state position, to run for a state position. So you almost never see somebody working class running for those positions. There are still relatively few people of color running for those positions. And part of it is because of the way the districts are gerrymandered as well. That's something that's, I think, on everybody's mind. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in order to try to make some of these changes and be able to get more things passed in fewer than 36 years, Beth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there are a couple of things that you lifted up about erasure, and then just like the urgency, and then also ensuring that there isn't the backsliding, right? So everyone runs the progressive, and then you look at what they did 2 years later and you're like, what did you do? And so I'm going to ask a last question about generally how can progressives work together in 2022 and beyond? What are the top things on everyone's priority list, and how can we work together? So I'm going to start with Elvis. I'll go to Mahtowin, and then I'll go to Vaughn.
But so top of our list for 2020 for this coming year. I'll start. I cut kind of two different tracks. I think on the one hand, our job is always to help to shift the conversation to create the new common sense, right? To what like, how do we create that?
The reason we do it in this kind of way is
and I think there are a couple of spaces, there are a couple of fights that are really key, and I think are really obvious as opportunities for us to move in that section, and in that way. And one is just like, people are are just hurting when it comes to the situation with rents, right? With the housing crisis. And if we don't get real about addressing that and understanding that as a terrain of struggle in 2022, we're going to miss the boat. And we're gonna miss the golden opportunity to really talk about whose cities are these, whose state is this, right? Like the investment that folks have made in these communities and these neighborhoods for generations, now getting wiped out or sort of displaced, but not, in some senses, some folks are being displaced without moving, right? I mean, the neighborhood characteristic has changed, and they're like the last stronghold, and so I feel like that is one area where it is an opportunity to build some cross-class alliances, and it's an opportunity to address something that goes to the heart of this system, and see housing as a social, public necessity, not just as a financial investment, which I think is how it's dominated right now. So I would say the housing fight for us is a big struggle, and I would just say to step back for us, the way we see a lot of it is we need to help create this and articulate better what that common sense is. It's a reality that people are experiencing already. We just have to help people name it and frame it and understand what the possible solutions are. And I think the flip side of that is we have to expose the contradictions within the opposition and what are the ways in which their strategy or lack of solution, because let's be real, half the time the solution is let's kick the can down the line or let's tighten our belts further. And that is really about a subset of folks. So housing is a big area of struggle and terrain. Initiatives like Fair Share, pieces that put the question fundamentally around how we're resourcing our cities and state that get to this question around wealth distribution and income inequality or wealth inequality, I think are huge and fundamental. And then I would say we have so many opportunities with the elections coming up next year, up and down the ballot, and particularly some of the statewide races. And I think that those are, this is an opportunity maybe once in a generation to elect a very different legislature and maybe the type of person at the corner office and at the State House that we haven't had in maybe forever. And so I think that those are really top of mind for us and spaces where we want to put our resources and energy next year and invite, as has been said before, this has to be done in coalition, has to be done as a concerted effort, and so inviting folks to join us.
Absolutely. Let's go to you, Mahtowin. What are some things that you want to lift up as top priorities in 2022 and beyond, and how can we work together?
Sure. When I'm thinking about 2022, I'm thinking, first of all, this is going to be another very difficult winter because of COVID. That's very clear, and we can see that in other countries. That where they've started to their numbers started to go up before ours went back up here in the north. And so I think we need to have that in mind. I really think that in order for people to be sufficiently politically engaged, their basic needs need to be met. So we need to make sure that eviction moratoriums stay in place. We need to make sure that money is going to people who are about to be foreclosed on or be evicted so that they are not out on the street. We need to make sure that people have the food they have. The food pantries have been largely desperate. And you can't get, as someone myself who, when we've had to use food pantries when my kids were younger plenty of times, and you can't live through that because you don't have fresh food and you don't have diapers and you don't have all those other things. Like, we need to make sure that people are getting their needs met. Once you get your needs met, it's a lot easier to engage. It's a lot easier to think about what you can be doing in the political process. And by political process, I don't just mean elections and stuff. I'm talking about our allegiance, we are allied with people also on the streets. It's not just about, everybody getting together to support a favorite candidate for governor or something like that. We have to continue to be out on the streets agitating because we can't be inside buildings for the next few months again. We can't go into the State House and take it over. yeah, or sit in somebody's office or anything like that. That's why people have been going outside Baker's house to have protests about climate and many other things. So I think the feet need to hit the street as always, and we need to be looking to broaden who we're working with, all of us. I think that's going to be really important, not just to stay within our own circles, but to make our movement much bigger. And that's going to position us to be able to do some of the things we do in the future. So that education and agitation, I would say.
Love it. Could be slogan of this panel, really. Let's go to Vaughn. What do you think we as a progressive movement can do to work together in 2022? What should we? Oh, was I on mute that entire time?
Some of the things that I think we can take on. One is rent control for the whole state. Let's have rent control for everybody, everywhere. Number two is single payer. Let's have mass health for all. Expand mass health. Make it a statewide program. Fair share. We should continue that. Indigenous people's rights. My sister Mahtowin talked about it. Let's make sure that we have an Indigenous people's rights bill or an amendment or something that acknowledges what has happened here, the atrocities that have taken place in Massachusetts. All right. Elect a single payer governor, a governor that stands for single payer. Even if we can't achieve it nationally, let's make sure we do single payer here. Housing for all. Something that focuses in on the three necessities: food, shelter, clothing. Make sure that's guaranteed. And then finally, just like in South Africa, we should have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission around the issue of race and police brutality, because it's a reality in Boston. Nobody talks about it, but that's one of the elephants in the room. Truth and Reconciliation Commission around race. For instance, housing discrimination goes on a lot here. The segregation that goes on. We need to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission around the issue of race. I just want to say the Poor People's Campaign has talked about it, but we need to do it.
Okay, amazing. I learned so much in the past hour. I hope that other people did too. Let's all give a big round of applause and appreciation to Mahtowin, Vaughn, and Elvis for sharing with us how we should be oriented in the next year and well beyond to really make the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as racially equitable, as economically progressive, and more. So really, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible panel. I'm going to turn it back over to Cole from Mass Peace Action to take us into the next section.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, panelists. That was extremely thought-provoking and wide-ranging, and there's so much food for thought there. So thank you, everyone. Next, we're going to go into breakouts again to respond to the comments made in the last two panels, both the state strategy panel and the state issues panel. Some of the morning break, we're going to basically try to keep the breakouts the same in the afternoon as they were in the morning so the discussion can build. But some of the breakouts were too small in the morning, and also some people have left. So we have combined some breakouts. So we combined breakouts 5 and 6, 8, 9, and 10, 7 and 12, and 3 and 14. So we're going to have, I think it's 10 breakouts instead of 15. When I put you in the breakouts, please bear with us for about 5 minutes. People that left the Zoom and came back, I have to manually assign them, and that won't happen until after we open the room. So there'll probably be like a 5-minute period before all the people are in your room. So you might start talking informally, but wait a couple minutes for a few more people to join. Then after the breakouts, we'll come back together for a brief closing session. We'll hear a message from Senator Elizabeth Warren, and then Caroline Bays will close out the day. That's at, I'm sorry, what time is it? 4:05, we're supposed to do that? Yes, indeed, at 4:05. So here we go.
Dr. Harrison,
Yes, Vaughn.
could you assign me to a group? You got me as a co-host.
I'm going to put you in a group. I am going to, I swear.
Okay.
This stupid Zoom program only lets one person do it, and it's maddening. But every time we do breakouts a different way, there's something to learn, I tell you.
Okay, all right.
But just another couple minutes. Got 13 to go. 13 to go.
Vaughn, great hearing you talk.
Likewise. Who am I speaking with? Is
My
this
name
Sharon?
No, my name is Francis Yasmin Motiwala.
Oh, hi, Francis.
I'm formerly spent 14 years with Peace Action.
Okay.
In the national office and the West Coast.
Okay.
San Diego.
California?
And for Congress in
Okay.
California.
Yep.
Okay,
Ran for
excellent, excellent.
Congress, and now I'm working to help other people do the same.
All right, we should talk about your experience in Cali.
Happy to.
Yeah. Let me send you my number in the chat.
Cool.
When you have a chance, let's talk.
Yeah, happy to.
All right.
Great.
Before I'm assigned to a group.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's. Oh, okay. Okay, wait. I'm not gonna.
Uh-oh. It's telling me to join.
Okay,
He's
let's
kicking
join.
me out.
We'll do that. I'll be around. We'll do this again in a group when we're back in the big chat. All right. Oh, there we go. I got it.
All right.
I got you.
Put it in your phone quickly.
On it. I got it copied and pasted.
And if not, I will connect the two of you.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Heading.
I appreciate you much.
Got it. All right. I'll talk to you soon, Vaughn. Bye.
All right. All right. Let me join. Thank you.
Okay, the people that are left, you've been invited to a room, and I recommend you click where it says enter the room. And that may look different on a computer or a tablet or a phone. I hope you can figure it out.